Kyle's hand trembles as he reaches for his boss in Bay 3, heart pounding. One touch will cross every line. Darius turns, catches him watching, and instead of anger, his voice drops low. Come here. Let me teach you everything you've been too afraid to want. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Kyle Morrison had been working at Bennett's auto shop for exactly 3 weeks when his entire world shifted on its axis. At 22, Kyle was a virgin in every sense that mattered. Not from religious conviction or moral stance, but from a combination of crippling shyness, growing up in a small town where being different meant being invisible, and spending most of his adolescence with his nose buried in repair manuals, instead of at parties where normal teenagers supposedly figured these things out. He'd known he was attracted to men since he was 15, sitting in shop class watching Tommy Henderson's hands work a wrench, feeling something stir low in his belly that had nothing to do with carburetors. But knowing and doing were two very different things, especially in a town where the only gay bar was 3 counties over, and everyone knew everyone else's business. So Kyle had kept his head down, finished high school, enrolled in technical college, and emerged 2 years later with a certification in automotive repair and 0 experience with actual human intimacy. He could rebuild a transmission blindfolded, but the thought of kissing another man made his palms sweat. When he'd applied for the position at Bennett's auto shop in the city, he'd been shocked to get called for an interview. The shop had a reputation, not just locally, but regionally. They specialized in classic car restoration, the kind of detailed, painstaking work that separated real craftsmen from parts changers. Getting hired there would be a dream come true professionally. He just hadn't expected the owner to be the most devastatingly attractive man he'd ever seen in his life. Darius Bennett was 41, though he could have passed for mid-30s easily. He stood 6'7", with deep mahogany skin that seemed to glow with health and vitality, and a build that spoke of decades of real physical labor. Broad shoulders, powerful arms, hands that looked capable of crushing steel, but moved with surprising delicacy when handling engine components. When Kyle had walked into that interview, hand shaking as he offered it for a handshake, Darius had wrapped those massive fingers around his, and Kyle had felt the contact everywhere. The man's grip was firm, but not aggressive, his dark eyes kind but penetrating, and his smile when he looked over Kyle's resume had been genuinely warm. The interview had gone well, despite Kyle's nervousness. Darius asked smart questions about Kyle's training, his approach to problem solving, his comfort level with different types of vehicles. When he'd mentioned his particular interest in older muscle cars, Darius's face had lit up. "That's exactly what we need around here," Darius had said, his deep voice sending shivers down Kyle's spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Someone young enough to have fresh perspective but passionate enough to respect the craft. When can you start?" Kyle had stammered something about 2 weeks' notice at his current job, a nothing position at a quick lube place that he'd taken just to pay bills while looking for real work. Darius had nodded approvingly. "A man who honors his commitments. I like that. See you in 2 weeks, Kyle." Those 2 weeks had been torture. Kyle found himself thinking about Darius constantly, replaying that handshake, that smile, the way his name had sounded in that deep voice. He knew it was pointless, knew that men like Darius Bennett didn't look twice at awkward virgin mechanics fresh out of tech school. But he couldn't stop himself from daydreaming, from wondering what it would be like to be touched by hands that knew how to handle delicate machinery, to be looked at with the same focus Darius brought to his restoration projects. His first day at Bennett's had been overwhelming in the best way. The shop was immaculate, everything organized with military precision. 3 bays, each containing a project in various stages of completion. A 1,969 Camaro getting a full engine rebuild. A 1,957 Chevy Bel Air having its body restored. And in the 3rd bay, Darius's personal project, a 1,970 Plymouth Barracuda that was his pride and joy. The other mechanics, 2 guys in their 30s named Jason and Carlos, had welcomed him easily enough. They'd shown him around, explained the shop systems, pointed out where everything was kept. But it was Darius himself who had taken Kyle under his wing. "You're going to start by learning how we do things here," Darius had explained, his massive presence somehow not intimidating but comforting. "Every shop has its own rhythm, its own standards. I want you to shadow me for the first week, watch how I work, ask questions, then we'll start you on simpler projects and build from there." So Kyle had spent that first week following Darius around like a puppy, which would have been humiliating except that Darius was an exceptional teacher. Patient, thorough, willing to explain not just what he was doing but why. He never made Kyle feel stupid for asking questions, never rushed through explanations. And God, watching him work was like watching poetry in motion. Those huge hands moving with precision and delicacy, his body shifting fluidly under the car when he needed to get a different angle, the concentration on his face when he was solving a particularly tricky problem. Kyle found himself getting lost in observation, having to shake himself back to attention when Darius asked him a question. By the end of week 1, Kyle was hopelessly infatuated. He knew it was unprofessional, knew it was dangerous to develop feelings for his boss, knew nothing could ever come of it. But he couldn't help himself. Darius was everything Kyle had never let himself dream about. Strong, intelligent, kind, and so masculine it made Kyle's breath catch just being near him. Week 2 had brought more hands-on work. Darius had started letting Kyle handle basic tasks while he supervised, offering corrections gently when needed, praise when Kyle got something right. And if sometimes Darius stood close enough that Kyle could smell him, motor oil and clean sweat and something woodsy that might have been cologne, well, Kyle told himself he was imagining the significance of it. If sometimes Darius's hand lingered on Kyle's shoulder when he was showing him something, or if his fingers brushed Kyle's when passing tools, that was just normal shop interaction, nothing more. Kyle tried not to notice how his body responded to those brief touches, the way his skin seemed to wake up wherever contact occurred, the heat that pooled low in his belly when Darius leaned over him to check his work. He tried not to think about what those hands would feel like without the barrier of clothes, what that deep voice would sound like saying something other than instructions about torque specifications. He was doing a decent job of keeping his attraction buried until that Tuesday afternoon in his 3rd week, when everything changed. It had been a slow day. Jason and Carlos had both left early, Jason to attend his daughter's school play, and Carlos to deal with a plumbing emergency at home. A customer who'd been scheduled for a pickup had called to push it to the next day. By 4 o'clock, it was just Kyle and Darius in the shop, the Barracuda up on the lift in Bay 3, everything else quiet. "Why don't you head out early?" Darius had suggested, wiping his hands on a rag as he stepped back from the lift. "I'm just going to do some fine-tuning on the carburetor. Nothing that needs 2 sets of hands." But Kyle, eager for any excuse to spend more time in Darius's presence, had shaken his head. "I don't mind staying. I can clean up the other bays, organize tools. There's always something to do." Darius had given him an appraising look, something flickering in his dark eyes that Kyle couldn't read. "You're a hard worker, Kyle. I appreciate that. But you don't have to prove anything. You've already shown you've got the skills." The praise had made Kyle's chest warm. "I just want to pull my weight, and honestly, I don't have anywhere else to be." Something in his tone must have communicated the loneliness behind those words because Darius's expression had softened. "All right then. I've got some paperwork in the office I've been putting off. If you want to stay and tidy up the bays, I won't stop you. But you're on the clock, so don't work for free." Kyle had nodded, grateful for the permission to stay, and had busied himself in Bay 1 while Darius headed to the small office at the back of the shop. For the next hour, Kyle methodically cleaned and organized, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of the work. He could hear Darius moving around occasionally, the sound of filing cabinets opening and closing, the low murmur of his voice as he talked on the phone. Around 5:30, Kyle finished in Bay 1 and moved to Bay 2. He was halfway through organizing the tool chest when he realized he needed the specialty torque wrench that he'd last seen in Bay 3. The Barracuda was still up on the lift, but Darius wasn't visible. Must still be in the office, Kyle figured, and headed around to the tool bench in the 3rd bay. That's when he saw it. Darius wasn't in the office. He was in Bay 3, standing beside his beloved Barracuda, one hand braced against the car's frame, while the other worked steadily between his own legs. Kyle froze, his brain short-circuiting as it tried to process what his eyes were seeing. Darius had his coveralls unzipped and pushed down to his thighs. His eyes were closed, head tilted back slightly, his expression one of focused intensity that Kyle recognized from when he was working on a particularly challenging repair. But there was nothing mechanical about what was happening. His hand moved in a steady rhythm, and even from where Kyle stood, stunned and unable to move, he could see the thick length emerging from that massive fist with each stroke. Kyle had seen his share of explicit material online, knew intellectually what men looked like in various states, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of Darius Bennett touching himself in the golden late-afternoon light filtering through the bay door. He was magnificent, his body all powerful lines and smooth skin, and what he held in his hand was proportionate to his size in a way that made Kyle's mouth go dry and his pulse thunder in his ears. He should leave. He knew he should back away quietly, pretend he hadn't seen anything, go to the bathroom and splash cold water on his face until he could think straight. But his feet wouldn't move. His body had locked up, every sense suddenly hyper-aware. He could hear the slick sound of Darius's hand moving, could see the tension in those broad shoulders, could watch the muscles in his powerful thighs flex with each movement. Darius's breathing had deepened, quiet sounds escaping his throat that went straight to Kyle's core and made him ache in ways he'd never experienced. Kyle wasn't even aware he'd made a sound, some small involuntary noise of shock and want and overwhelming sensation, until Darius's eyes flew open and locked directly onto him. For a frozen moment, neither of them moved. Darius's hand stilled but didn't move away. His eyes were dark and intense, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths that might have been arousal, or might have been surprise, or might have been both. Kyle's face flooded with heat, mortification crashing over him like a wave. "I'm sorry," he stammered, finally finding his voice. "I didn't mean to. I was just looking for the torque wrench and I didn't know you were. I'll go. I'm sorry. I'll just—" "Kyle!" Darius's voice cut through his panicked rambling, deep and steady and somehow not angry. "Don't go." Kyle's feet obeyed before his brain could catch up, keeping him rooted to the spot even though every instinct screamed at him to run. His eyes, which had briefly dropped to the oil-stained concrete floor in embarrassment, were drawn back up like magnets to Darius, who still hadn't moved, who was still standing there with his hand wrapped around himself, who was looking at Kyle with an expression that made Kyle's knees weak. "How long were you watching?" Darius asked, and there was no accusation in his tone, just curiosity. I just got here, I swear. I wasn't." Kyle's words tumbled over each other. "I came for the torque wrench and I saw you and I froze and I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to invade your privacy." Darius's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't not a smile either. "But you didn't leave." The observation hung in the air between them. Kyle couldn't deny it. He'd had plenty of time to back away, to make noise, to announce his presence. He'd stood there and watched, transfixed. "I couldn't," Kyle admitted in a whisper, his face burning. "I couldn't move." "Because you were shocked?" Darius asked, his hand still resting against himself, not moving but not hiding either. "Or because you wanted to watch?" The question was gentle but direct, demanding honesty. Kyle could feel his heart hammering so hard, he was sure Darius could hear it across the bay. "Both," he managed, the word barely audible. Darius's expression shifted, something heating in those dark eyes that made Kyle's entire body respond. "Come here, Kyle." It wasn't a command exactly, more like an invitation. But Kyle's feet moved anyway, carrying him across the bay until he stood just a few feet away from Darius, close enough to smell him, motor oil and musk, and something primal that made Kyle's head spin. Up close, the reality of what Darius held in his hand was even more overwhelming. Kyle had never seen anything like it in person, thick and long, and somehow both intimidating and beautiful. He couldn't stop staring, his mouth gone completely dry, his own body responding in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. "Kyle," Darius said softly, drawing his attention back up. "Look at me." Kyle forced his eyes up to meet Darius's, expecting to see mockery or anger or disgust. Instead, he saw heat and something that looked almost like tenderness. "How old are you?" Darius asked. 22, Kyle answered automatically. "And have you ever been with anyone? A man?" Kyle shook his head, unable to form words. "Have you ever done anything with anyone?" Darius pressed gently. "Kissed? Touched?" Another head shake. Kyle felt tears of humiliation prick at his eyes. Here he was, 22 years old, and he might as well be a teenager for all his experience. But instead of laughing or seeming disappointed, Darius's expression softened even further. "Hey," he said gently, "there's no shame in that. Everyone moves at their own pace." "I'm a virgin," Kyle blurted out, needing to say it, needing Darius to understand exactly how pathetic he was. "I've never done anything with anyone. I've barely even kissed someone. I don't know what I'm doing or what I want or—" "Kyle," Darius interrupted gently, "do you want to learn?" The question stopped Kyle's spiral of self-deprecation cold. "What?" Darius shifted slightly, his hand moving in a slow stroke that drew Kyle's eyes down again like gravity. "Do you want to learn? Do you want me to teach you?" Kyle's brain struggled to process the words. Was Darius offering what it sounded like he was offering? I don't understand. I think you do, Darius said, his voice dropping lower, rougher. You've been looking at me for 3 weeks, Kyle. I've seen it. The way your eyes follow me, the way you blush when I stand close, the way you react when I touch you. You want this. You want me. And God help me, I want you too. Kyle felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You do? I do, Darius confirmed. From the moment you walked in for that interview, so nervous you were shaking, but with fire in your eyes when you talked about cars. I've been fighting it because you work for me, because you're young, because I knew you were inexperienced and I didn't want to take advantage. But Kyle, if you're interested, if you want to explore this, I'll make it good for you. I'll teach you everything you want to know. Kyle's entire body was thrumming with need and fear and desperate want. I don't know how. I don't know what to do. That's what I'm offering to teach you, Darius said patiently. We can start slow, start simple. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. But if you want to learn what it feels like to touch someone, to be touched, I'll show you. Kyle's eyes dropped back down to where Darius's hand was moving again in slow, steady strokes. Can I? He started, then stopped, his courage failing. Can you what? Darius encouraged. Tell me what you want, Kyle. Can I touch you? The words came out in a rush, barely coherent. Can I see what it feels like? Darius's breath hitched slightly, his hand stilling. You want to touch me? Kyle nodded, not trusting his voice. Come here then, Darius said, shifting slightly to give Kyle better access. Come see what you've been curious about. Kyle's legs felt like they might give out as he took those final steps forward, closing the distance until he was standing right in front of Darius, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body. His hands trembled at his sides, uncertain what to do, where to put them, how to bridge the gap between wanting and doing. It's okay to be nervous, Darius said gently, reading Kyle's hesitation. This is new for you. We'll go at your pace. He paused, his hand still wrapped around himself. But I need you to be sure, Kyle. Once we start this, once you touch me, we're crossing a line. I need to know you want this, that you're choosing it freely. I want this, Kyle said, surprised by the firmness in his own voice despite his shaking hands. I've wanted this since the day we met. I just never thought you'd want me back. Want you? Darius's voice roughened. Kyle, I've been losing my mind wanting you. Watching you bend over engines, seeing that focused look on your face when you're problem solving, hearing you laugh with Jason and Carlos. You have no idea how hard it's been to keep my hands to myself. The confession made Kyle's breath catch. Really? Really, Darius confirmed. Now come here and touch me. Let me teach you what it feels like. Kyle reached out with a trembling hand, hesitating for just a moment before his fingers made contact with Darius's wrist, the one connected to the hand that was wrapped around all that thick flesh. The skin was warm, the muscles beneath firm and alive with tension. He could feel Darius's pulse racing beneath his fingertips, proof that he wasn't the only one affected by this moment. Good, Darius murmured encouragingly. That's good, Kyle. Now move your hand up. Touch me properly. Kyle's hand slid up Darius's forearm, feeling the strength there, the coarse hair, the warmth of his skin. When he reached where Darius's hand gripped himself, he paused, his breath coming in short gasps. Can I? He whispered. Yes, Darius said, his voice strained. God, yes. Slowly, carefully, Kyle wrapped his fingers around Darius's hand, feeling the movement as Darius stroked himself once more. The sensation was overwhelming, being this close, feeling the motion, the heat, the aliveness of it all. Now take over, Darius instructed softly. Let me guide you at first. Darius removed his own hand, and Kyle found himself holding another man for the first time in his life. The weight of it, the heat, the silken steel texture was unlike anything he'd imagined. He stood frozen, overwhelmed by sensation and uncertainty. Move your hand, Darius coached, his voice husky. Slow and steady. Feel how I respond. Kyle obeyed, his hand moving tentatively at first, then with more confidence as he heard Darius's sharp intake of breath, felt the way his body tensed in response. This was power, Kyle realized. The ability to make someone like Darius, so strong and controlled, react with such intensity. That's it, Darius groaned, one of his large hands coming to rest on Kyle's shoulder, steadying himself. You're a natural, Kyle. God, that feels good. The praise sent warmth flooding through Kyle's body. He'd never been good at this kind of thing, had always assumed he'd be awkward and fumbling if he ever got the chance. But something about the way Darius guided him, encouraged him, made him feel capable and wanted. "Tighter," Darius instructed. "I like it firm, and twist your wrist just slightly on the upstroke." Kyle adjusted his grip, following the instructions, and was rewarded with a deep groan from Darius that went straight to Kyle's core. His own body was responding intensely. His jeans suddenly too tight, his skin too hot, every nerve ending alive with sensation. "You're hard," Darius observed, his eyes dropping to where Kyle's arousal was evident through his coveralls. "Does this turn you on? Touching me?" Kyle nodded mutely, unable to form words. His face burned with the admission, but he couldn't deny it. "Good," Darius said, satisfaction in his voice. "That's how it should be. Let me see you, Kyle. Let me see what I do to you." With his free hand, Kyle fumbled at his own zipper, his fingers clumsy with nerves and arousal. When he finally managed to free himself, the relief was immediate. He wasn't anywhere near Darius's size, and the comparison made him feel inadequate for a moment. But Darius's eyes heated as they took him in. "Beautiful," he murmured. "You're perfect, Kyle. Don't ever think otherwise." "I'm not." Kyle started to protest, but Darius cut him off. "You are," he said firmly. "Every man is built differently. That doesn't make anyone more or less. You're responsive and eager and so damn sexy standing there touching me while you're hard for me. That's what matters." The acceptance, the genuine appreciation in Darius's voice, made something tight in Kyle's chest loosen. He'd spent so many years feeling inadequate, feeling like his inexperience made him less than, but Darius looked at him like he was something precious, something desired. "Keep stroking me," Darius said, his breathing growing heavier. "I want to see you touch yourself too. Learn what you like. Learn what feels good." Kyle's hand moved to wrap around himself, the dual sensation of touching Darius while touching himself almost too much to process. His rhythm was unsteady at first, trying to coordinate both hands, but gradually he found a pattern that worked. "That's it," Darius encouraged, his eyes locked on Kyle's face. "You look so good like this, Kyle. So perfect. I've imagined this, you know. Late at night when I was alone, I'd think about you, about teaching you, about watching you discover pleasure." "You thought about me?" Kyle gasped, his hand moving faster on both of them now. "Every night," Darius admitted. "Every single night since you started. I'd lie in bed and picture you in my shop, those big curious eyes, those careful hands. I'd imagine what you'd look like, flushed and wanting, what sounds you'd make, how you'd taste." The words were like fuel on a fire, already burning out of control. Kyle felt his climax building faster than he'd ever experienced, driven by the physical sensation and the mental image of Darius thinking about him, wanting him. "I'm close," Kyle whimpered, embarrassed by how quickly it was happening. "I'm sorry. I can't." "Don't apologize," Darius said roughly. "Let go, Kyle. Let me see you. I want to watch you come undone." Permission granted, Kyle couldn't hold back. His release hit him like a wave, pleasure crashing through his body in pulses that left him gasping. His hand stilled on Darius as he shook through it, overwhelmed by the intensity. When he came back to himself, mortified by his lack of control, he found Darius watching him with such heat it made his spent body stir again. "Beautiful," Darius murmured. "Absolutely beautiful. Now keep going on me. I want to finish with your hand on me, Kyle. Give me that." Kyle's hand, which had frozen during his own release, started moving again on Darius. His grip was surer now, his movements more confident. He watched Darius's face, learning to read the signs of his pleasure, the way his jaw clenched, the way his breathing changed, the small sounds that escaped his throat. "Faster," Darius commanded, his voice strained. "Harder. I'm close." Kyle obeyed, his arm burning with the effort but unwilling to stop, desperate to give Darius this, to see him lose control the way Kyle just had. When Darius finally reached his peak, the sound he made was primal and raw, his whole body tensing as his release came in powerful surges that Kyle felt through every stroke. They stood there afterward, both breathing hard, Kyle's hand still wrapped around Darius as the aftershocks subsided. The garage was silent, except for their breathing and the distant sound of traffic outside. "Kyle," Darius said finally, his voice soft, "look at me." Kyle raised his eyes, expecting regret or awkwardness. Instead, he saw warmth and satisfaction, and something that looked like affection. "That was incredible," Darius said. "You were incredible. How do you feel?" "I don't know," Kyle admitted honestly. "Overwhelmed. Good. Scared. Happy. Everything all at once." Darius smiled, reaching out to cup Kyle's cheek with his free hand. "That's normal. First times are intense, but Kyle, I need you to know something. This wasn't just physical for me. I meant what I said. I want you. Not just for this, but for more. If you're interested. More? Kyle's voice was small, hardly daring to hope. More, Darius confirmed. Dating, seeing where this goes, building something real beyond just physical, if that's what you want too. Kyle felt tears prick his eyes, emotion overwhelming him. I want that. I want you. I just never thought. I know, Darius said gently, but now you know. Now we both know. So what do you say we clean up, close the shop properly, and go get some dinner? Talk about what happens next. Kyle nodded, a smile breaking across his face despite the tears threatening to fall. I'd like that. They cleaned themselves up using shop rags and the industrial sink in the corner, the intimacy of the simple act somehow as significant as what had just happened. Kyle felt different, changed fundamentally by the past half hour. He'd walked into Bay 3, a virgin who'd never touched another man, and he was leaving it as someone who'd been wanted, desired, taught by someone he was falling for. As they locked up the shop together, Darius's hand found Kyle's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The touch was simple but profound, a public claiming that made Kyle's heart soar. One thing, Darius said as they walked to his truck, we need to be careful at the shop. I don't want the other guys to feel uncomfortable, and I don't want anyone to think I'm playing favorites, or that you got your job because of this. I understand, Kyle said, though part of him wanted to shout from the rooftops that Darius Bennett wanted him. But outside of work, Darius continued, squeezing his hand, you're mine, if you'll have me, and I'm yours. Deal? Deal, Kyle agreed, his smile so wide it hurt his cheeks. They drove to a quiet diner on the edge of town, one where the booths offered privacy and the food was simple but good. Over burgers and fries, they talked about everything, expectations, boundaries, what they both wanted from this relationship. Darius was patient with Kyle's inexperience, reassuring when Kyle worried he wouldn't be enough, firm when Kyle tried to put himself down. You're going to make mistakes, Darius said at one point. We both are. This is new territory for both of us, me with someone so inexperienced, you with everything. But as long as we talk, as long as we're honest with each other, we'll figure it out. What if I disappoint you? Kyle asked quietly. What if I'm not good at this? At any of it? Darius reached across the table and took Kyle's hand. Kyle, you already exceeded every expectation I had. The way you touched me, the way you trusted me, the courage it took to admit what you wanted that was extraordinary. You're going to be fine, better than fine. By the time they finished eating, Kyle felt like he was floating. This day had started like any other Tuesday, and now here he was, holding hands with the man of his dreams, making plans for a second date, feeling wanted and desired and valued. When Darius dropped him back at the shop to get his own car, he pulled Kyle in for a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. See you tomorrow, Darius murmured against his lips. And Kyle, tonight, when you're lying in bed, thinking about what happened, remember that I'll be doing the same thing. Thinking about you, about us, about all the things I want to teach you and show you and explore with you. Kyle drove home in a daze, his lips still tingling from that kiss, his body still humming with remembered sensation. When he finally collapsed into his bed, he did exactly what Darius predicted, replaying every moment, every touch, every word. He'd started this day as a virgin who'd never been with anyone, terrified he'd never experienced connection or desire. He was ending it as someone who'd been thoroughly awakened, who'd discovered that the right person could make all his fears dissolve, who'd found not just physical pleasure but emotional connection with someone who genuinely wanted him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, navigating their relationship at work, learning how to be someone's boyfriend when he'd never done it before, continuing to explore the physical side of things he'd only just begun to discover. But tonight, Kyle let himself just feel happy, wanted, and finally, blissfully alive. The next morning, Kyle woke up with his alarm and lay there for a moment, wondering if yesterday had been some elaborate dream. But the slight ache in his arm from that sustained grip, the tenderness of his lips from that goodnight kiss, and the texts waiting on his phone from Darius confirmed it was all real. Good morning. Can't wait to see you today. Remember, professional at the shop, but tonight, you're all mine. Kyle read the message 3 times, his chest warm with happiness, before forcing himself out of bed. He showered, dressed in clean coveralls, and drove to the shop with his heart hammering in anticipation and nervousness. When he arrived, Darius was already there, as was Carlos. Jason showed up 5 minutes later. Everything proceeded normally. Assignments were given, coffee was poured, tools were distributed. But every time Kyle caught Darius's eye across the shop, there was a heat there that made his skin flush, a promise of what would come later. They worked through the morning without incident, Kyle focusing on the Camaro's transmission rebuild, while Darius supervised and assisted where needed. To anyone watching, they were simply boss and employee, maintaining professional boundaries. But Kyle was hyper-aware of every moment Darius came near, every casual touch as he demonstrated a technique, every low-voiced instruction that somehow felt intimate despite being purely mechanical. During lunch, when Jason and Carlos went to the diner down the street, Darius caught Kyle's hand briefly in the empty break room. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Not having regrets?" "No regrets," Kyle assured him. "Just counting down the hours until tonight." Darius smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face. "Good, because I have plans for you, things I want to show you, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Kyle said immediately, not even caring what the plans were. He trusted Darius completely. The afternoon dragged interminably. Kyle threw himself into his work, trying to make time pass faster, but every glance at the clock showed only minutes had elapsed. When 5 o'clock finally arrived and Jason and Carlos clocked out, Kyle was vibrating with anticipation. Darius locked the front door after they left and turned to Kyle with intent clear in his eyes. "Come with me," he said, leading Kyle not to Bay 3 where yesterday's encounter had happened, but to the small apartment above the shop that Darius maintained as a crash pad for late nights. Kyle had never been up here. The stairs at the back of the building led to a space that was surprisingly comfortable, a small living area, kitchenette, bathroom, and bedroom visible through an open door. It was clean and organized, very Darius, with personal touches that made it feel lived in rather than sterile. "I keep this space for when I'm working late and don't want to drive home," Darius explained. "But it also gives us privacy, if you're comfortable being here." "I'm comfortable," Kyle said, though his heart was racing. Being in Darius's personal space felt significant, intimate in a different way than the shop floor. Darius approached him slowly, giving Kyle time to adjust, to process. When he was close enough to touch, he cupped Kyle's face in both hands, those large, capable hands that knew how to fix engines and now knew how to touch Kyle in ways that made him melt. "Yesterday was intense," Darius said softly. "You did so well, Kyle. But I want to slow down today, take our time. I want to kiss you properly, touch you, help you discover what you like. Is that okay?" Kyle nodded, words failing him as Darius's mouth descended on his. The kiss was different from the brief one last night, deeper, more thorough, Darius's tongue sliding against his in a way that made Kyle's knees weak. He gripped Darius's shoulders for balance, overwhelmed by sensation. Darius kissed him until Kyle was breathless and clinging to him, then moved to his neck, finding sensitive spots Kyle didn't know existed. Every touch of lips and teeth sent electricity through his nervous system. "So responsive," Darius murmured against his skin. "Every touch makes you shiver. I love that about you." His hands found the zipper of Kyle's coveralls, slowly lowering it, peeling the fabric away from Kyle's shoulders. The air was warm, but Kyle shivered anyway, exposed in just his t-shirt and boxers as the coveralls pooled at his feet. "May I?" Darius asked, his fingers at the hem of Kyle's shirt. "Yes," Kyle breathed. "Please." The shirt joined the coveralls on the floor, leaving Kyle in just his boxers, feeling vulnerable and exposed but also wanted in a way he'd never experienced. Darius's eyes traveled over him with clear appreciation. "Perfect," Darius said firmly, as if daring Kyle to disagree. "Absolutely perfect." He guided Kyle backward until his legs hit the couch, then urged him to sit. Darius knelt between his spread thighs, his hands resting on Kyle's knees, his face level with Kyle's. "I want to touch you properly," Darius said. "Learn your body, find what makes you feel good, but you have to tell me if anything is too much or if you want me to stop. Communication is everything, Kyle. Always." "I will," Kyle promised, his voice shaking with anticipation. Darius's hand slid up Kyle's thighs, the touch firm and confident. When he reached the elastic of Kyle's boxers, he paused, looking up for permission. Kyle lifted his hips in answer, and Darius pulled the fabric down and off, leaving Kyle completely bare. The vulnerability was overwhelming, but also intoxicating. No one had ever seen him like this, looked at him with such focused attention, touched him with such clear intent to bring pleasure. Darius started at his ankles, his hands mapping Kyle's skin with thorough attention. He found ticklish spots behind Kyle's knees that made him squirm, sensitive areas on his inner thighs that made him gasp. Every touch was deliberate, educational, Darius watching Kyle's reactions and adjusting accordingly. "You're so responsive," Darius observed, his voice rough with arousal. "Every touch registers on your face. I can read you so easily." When his hand finally wrapped around Kyle's arousal, Kyle thought he might die from the sensation. This was different from touching himself. Darius's grip was firmer, his movements more confident, and the fact that it was someone else's hand made everything exponentially more intense. "Breathe," Darius instructed when Kyle forgot how. "Just feel it. Don't think about anything else." But thinking about anything else was impossible when Darius was touching him like this, when those dark eyes were watching his every reaction, when that deep voice was murmuring encouragement and praise. "That's it. Let me see what you like. Does this feel good? What about this?" Kyle could only nod and gasp, his hands fisting in the couch cushions as pleasure built with devastating speed. When Darius's mouth descended on him, wet heat engulfing him completely, Kyle actually cried out, overwhelmed by sensation unlike anything he'd imagined. Darius took his time, clearly experienced and skilled, bringing Kyle to the edge and backing off repeatedly until Kyle was trembling and begging without words. When he finally let Kyle tumble over into release, it was more intense than yesterday, drawn out and thorough in a way that left Kyle shaking. "Good," Darius said approvingly, pressing soft kisses to Kyle's trembling thighs. "So good for me, Kyle." As Kyle came back to himself, he became aware that Darius was still fully clothed, still clearly aroused but focused entirely on Kyle's pleasure. "What about you?" Kyle managed to ask, his voice wrecked. "Tonight was about you," Darius said gently. "Learning what you like, how you respond. We have time for everything else." But Kyle found he didn't want to wait. He wanted to return the favor, wanted to learn how to bring Darius pleasure the way he'd just received it. "Teach me," he said, sitting up with determination. "Teach me how to use my mouth on you." Darius's eyes darkened with heat. "Are you sure? That's advanced for day 2. "I'm sure," Kyle insisted. "I want to, please." Darius stood and began removing his own coveralls with deliberate slowness, revealing his body inch by inch. Kyle watched transfixed, as all that smooth, dark skin was exposed, the powerful muscles, the sheer size of him. When Darius finally stood bare before him, Kyle's mouth watered with want and nervousness in equal measure. "Come here," Darius said, sitting on the couch where Kyle had been moments before. "Kneel between my legs." Kyle obeyed, finding himself in the position Darius had occupied earlier. From this angle, Darius was even more impressive, his arousal thick and hard and honestly intimidating. "Start simple," Darius coached. "Use your hand first. Remember what I showed you yesterday." Kyle wrapped his fingers around Darius, relearning the weight and heat and texture. His confidence from yesterday returned as he found the rhythm Darius liked, watching his face for reactions. "Good," Darius groaned. "Now use your mouth, but take it slow. Start with just the tip. Use your tongue. Don't worry about taking much at first." Kyle leaned forward, his heart pounding, and let his tongue explore. The taste was different than he expected, clean skin and salt, and something uniquely Darius. He experimented with different movements, paying attention to which ones made Darius's breath hitch or drew those deep sounds from his throat. "That's perfect," Darius encouraged, one hand coming to rest gently in Kyle's hair, not pushing but present. "Now take a little more. Remember to breathe through your nose." Kyle followed instructions, taking more into his mouth carefully. It was overwhelming, the size, the taste, the intimacy of the act. But more overwhelming was the way Darius responded, the way his thighs tensed, the way his breathing roughened, the way his fingers tightened slightly in Kyle's hair. "You're doing so well," Darius praised, his voice strained. "So good for me, Kyle, just like that." Kyle found a rhythm that worked, using his hand for what his mouth couldn't accommodate, building confidence with each pass. When Darius warned him he was close, Kyle didn't pull away. He wanted this, wanted to give Darius everything. Darius's release was powerful, and Kyle struggled not to choke but managed, swallowing and continuing his ministrations, until Darius gently urged him to stop. "Come here," Darius said, pulling Kyle up and into his arms, holding him close. "You're incredible. Absolutely incredible." They sat like that for long minutes, Kyle tucked against Darius's chest, listening to his heartbeats slow to normal. The intimacy of it was almost more intense than the physical acts: being held, being wanted, being safe. "How do you feel?" Darius asked eventually. "Like I'm discovering who I actually am," Kyle admitted. "Like everything before was just waiting for this." Darius kissed the top of his head. "You're a natural at this, Kyle. At all of it, the physical stuff, yes, but also the emotional connection. You're open and honest and present. That's rare and precious." Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine: professional at the shop during the day, intimate and exploratory after hours. Darius took his role as teacher seriously, introducing Kyle to new experiences gradually, always checking in, always making sure Kyle felt safe and wanted. They went on actual dates, dinners, movies, long drives where they talked about everything and nothing. Kyle learned that Darius loved classic jazz, read voraciously, and volunteered at a youth mentorship program. Darius learned that Kyle had a wicked sense of humor once he relaxed, could quote entire episodes of car restoration shows, and had a vulnerability that made Darius want to protect him while also pushing him to grow. The physical exploration continued too. Darius taught Kyle about his own body, about what gave him pleasure, about how to ask for what he wanted. He introduced him to different positions, different rhythms, different levels of intensity. And when Kyle was finally ready for full intimacy, Darius made it perfect, slow and careful and thorough, making sure Kyle felt nothing but pleasure as he adjusted to new sensations. "You're doing so well," Darius murmured, as he moved carefully inside Kyle for the first time, watching his face for any sign of discomfort. "So perfect. Tell me how you feel." "Full," Kyle gasped, overwhelmed by the sensation. "So full. It's intense but good. So good." "I've got you," Darius assured him, his movements controlled and deliberate. "I'm going to make this incredible for you." And he did. He always did. Every time they came together, Darius made sure Kyle felt cherished and desired, and thoroughly satisfied. And gradually, Kyle learned how to return that gift, how to touch Darius in ways that made him lose his legendary control, how to use his mouth and hands and body to bring pleasure as well as receive it. 3 months into their relationship, Jason and Carlos figured it out. Not because Kyle and Darius were careless at work, they maintained strict professionalism in the shop, but because Kyle had changed so fundamentally from the shy, uncertain kid who'd started 3 months ago into someone confident and happy, and obviously in love. "So," Jason said one afternoon when Darius was out on a parts run and Kyle was working alone in Bay 2, "You and the boss, huh?" Kyle froze, his stomach dropping. "I don't know what you mean." "Come on," Carlos chimed in with a grin. "We're not blind. The way you two look at each other when you think no one's watching. The fact that you're both suddenly always the last ones here. Kyle, man, it's okay. We're happy for you." "You are?" Kyle asked cautiously. "Hell yeah," Jason said. "Darius has been alone too long, and you've been good for him. He smiles more, seems lighter, and you've come out of your shell. Whatever's happening between you two is working. Just maybe try to be a little less obvious with the eye contact," Carlos added with a laugh. "You both get this look sometimes that's pretty unmistakable." Kyle blushed but felt relief flood through him. "We're trying to keep it professional here. We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable." "You're not," Jason assured him. "We're mechanics, not prudes. As long as you're both happy and it doesn't affect the work, which it hasn't, we're good." When Kyle told Darius about the conversation that evening, Darius pulled him into a hug. "I'm glad they know," he admitted. "I hated hiding it from them. They're not just employees, they're friends." "Does this mean we can be more open?" Kyle asked hopefully. "Within reason," Darius said. "I still won't kiss you in the shop during work hours, but maybe I don't have to pretend I'm not crazy about you quite so hard." As 6 months became, 8 became 10, Kyle bloomed under Darius's care and attention. His skills as a mechanic improved dramatically. Having confidence in his personal life translated to confidence in his professional life. He took on more complex projects, started developing his own specialty in electrical systems, and began building a reputation among their client base. But more importantly, he learned what it meant to be loved. Darius showed him through actions and words that he was valued, desired, wanted, not despite his inexperience but including all of it. He learned that intimacy was about more than physical acts. It was about being seen completely and accepted anyway, about trusting someone with your vulnerabilities, about building something together that was stronger than either person alone. They moved in together after 8 months, Kyle giving up his tiny studio apartment to share Darius's house across town. Waking up next to Darius every morning, falling asleep in his arms every night, building a life together that included mundane domesticity and passionate intimacy in equal measure. It was everything Kyle had never let himself dream about. 1 year after that first encounter in Bay 3, Darius took Kyle back to the shop after hours. They stood in the same spot where everything had changed, where Kyle had walked in on Darius and frozen with want and fear. 1 year ago, Darius said, pulling Kyle close, you walked through that door and saw me, and instead of running, you stayed. You were brave enough to admit what you wanted, even though you were terrified. That bravery changed both our lives. You changed my life, Kyle corrected. You showed me what I'd been missing, what I was capable of, who I could be. We changed each other, Darius said. You taught me that taking chances could lead to the best things. That opening myself up to someone young and inexperienced and uncertain could bring more joy than I'd found in years of playing it safe. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Kyle's breath caught as Darius opened it to reveal 2 simple matching bands. I know we can't make it legal everywhere yet, Darius said softly, but I want to make it official between us. I want you to be mine and me to be yours, publicly and permanently. Kyle Morrison, will you marry me? Kyle didn't even realize he was crying until Darius thumbed away the tears. Yes, he managed through the emotion. God, yes. They slid the rings on each other's fingers right there in Bay 3, where it had all begun. When Darius kissed him, slow and deep and full of promise, Kyle thought about how far he'd come. From a virgin who'd never been touched, to a man who was thoroughly loved. From someone who didn't know what he wanted, to someone who'd found everything he needed. Thank you, he whispered against Darius's lips, for seeing me, for wanting me, for teaching me everything. Thank you for being brave enough to learn, Darius replied, for trusting me with something so precious, for building this life with me. They made love that night in the apartment above the shop, slow and tender and full of emotion. Kyle knew every inch of Darius's body now, knew exactly how to touch him, how to move, how to drive him to the edge and beyond. And Darius knew him just as thoroughly, could play his body like an instrument, bringing him pleasure so intense it bordered on overwhelming. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Kyle reflected on his journey. He'd started as a terrified virgin who thought he'd never experience connection or intimacy. He was ending it, or rather, continuing it, as someone thoroughly loved, completely satisfied, and finally, blissfully whole. What are you thinking? Darius asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Kyle's bare back. That I'm the luckiest person alive, Kyle admitted. That a year ago I couldn't have imagined this. That you took someone who knew nothing and taught him everything worth knowing. You always had it in you, Darius said. I just helped you find it. The passion, the curiosity, the capacity for love, that was all you, Kyle. I just got lucky enough to be the one you shared it with. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, Kyle's head on Darius's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. In the morning, they'd go back to being boss and employee, mentor and student, maintaining their professional boundaries during work hours. But after hours, they were husbands in everything but the legal paperwork, partners building a life together, 2 men who'd found in each other everything they'd been missing. Darius continued to teach Kyle not just about physical intimacy, but about life, about confidence, about being present and open and willing to take risks. And Kyle taught Darius too, about letting people in, about the joy of watching someone discover themselves, about how love could transform people when it was given freely and received with gratitude. Months became years. They worked side by side in the shop, building the business together. Kyle eventually became a partner, his skills now on par with Darius's own. They expanded into a second location, hired more mechanics, built a reputation that extended well beyond their city. But more important than any professional success was what they built at home. A relationship based on trust and communication, passion tempered with tenderness, desire that never faded, even as it matured into something deeper and more sustaining than pure physical need. They traveled together, taking road trips in classic cars, Darius restored specifically for the journey. They built a family of friends who loved and accepted them. They created traditions, anniversary dinners at the diner where they'd had their first real date, Sunday mornings spent in bed talking and laughing and making love, Friday nights teaching automotive classes at the youth center where Darius volunteered. Kyle's parents eventually came around, initially shocked by his relationship but won over by seeing how happy he was, how thoroughly loved. Darius's mother, a formidable woman who'd raised him single-handedly after his father died, welcomed Kyle with open arms and immediately started planning the wedding she insisted they needed, regardless of legal status. 5 years after that first encounter, they held a commitment ceremony surrounded by friends and family. It wasn't legal yet, that would come later, but it was real in every way that mattered. As Kyle stood at the altar watching Darius walk toward him in a perfectly tailored suit, he thought about the terrified virgin who'd frozen in place watching his boss touch himself in Bay 3. That man was gone, replaced by someone confident and loved and thoroughly satisfied in every aspect of his life. Someone who'd learned that being vulnerable wasn't weakness but strength, that asking for what you wanted wasn't shameful but necessary, that love, real, deep, transformative love, was worth every risk. "I love you," he mouthed to Darius as he reached the altar. "I love you too," Darius mouthed back, his eyes shining with emotion. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to continue teaching and learning from each other, to face challenges together, to build a life that honored both their individual strengths and their partnership. When they kissed, sealing those promises, everyone cheered. At the reception, Jason gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. When Kyle started at the shop 5 years ago, he was this quiet, scared kid who barely made eye contact. Darius was this grumpy perfectionist who'd forgotten how to smile. Somehow, those two broken pieces fit together perfectly and made something beautiful. They taught each other how to live again, how to love, how to be whole. And watching them build this relationship has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. To Darius and Kyle, may you have 50 more years of teaching each other everything worth knowing. That night, in the honeymoon suite of a downtown hotel, Darius and Kyle made love with the passion of new lovers and the intimacy of longtime partners. They knew each other's bodies completely now, could read every signal, could bring each other to pleasure with practiced ease, but it never got old, never lost its power to move them. "Remember that first time?" Kyle asked afterward, trailing his fingers across Darius's chest. "When I could barely touch you without shaking?" "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met," Darius replied, "standing there, admitting what you wanted, even though you were terrified." "You made it easy," Kyle said. "You made me feel safe enough to want, confident enough to ask, brave enough to try." "We made each other better," Darius corrected, pulling Kyle closer. "And we'll keep doing it for the rest of our lives." And they did. Through challenges and triumphs, through ordinary days and extraordinary moments, they continued to build their life together. The shop thrived, their relationship deepened, and the love that had started with one reckless moment of honesty in Bay 3 grew into something that sustained them both through everything life brought. Kyle never forgot what it felt like to be that scared virgin, frozen in place, wanting something desperately but certain he'd never have it. He used that memory to fuel his volunteer work with LGBTQ+ youth, helping other young people find the courage to be themselves, to ask for what they wanted, to believe they deserved love and happiness. And Darius never forgot what it felt like to open himself to someone new, to take the risk of teaching and guiding and loving someone inexperienced. He used that memory to remain patient and open, to continue being the kind of partner who created safety for vulnerability, who encouraged growth, who loved without reservation. 20 years after that first encounter, they stood in Bay 3 again, now married legally as well as personally, their shop empire spanning 3 locations, their lives rich with friends and family and purpose. "Still glad you didn't run?" Darius asked, pulling Kyle close in the spot where everything had begun. "Best decision I never made," Kyle replied, grinning. "My feet wouldn't move. I was frozen with want. And I was frozen with the certainty that I was about to lose the best thing that had ever happened to me," Darius admitted. "But you stayed. You were brave enough to want me back." "Always," Kyle promised. "Then, now, forever. You taught me everything worth knowing about cars, about life, about love. About being brave enough to reach for what I wanted instead of settling for what felt safe." They kissed in the golden late afternoon light, just like that first time, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the machines they'd restored together. But this time, there was no uncertainty, no fear, no hesitation, just love, deep and abiding and absolutely certain. "Let me show you something," Darius said, leading Kyle to the Barracuda that still occupied Bay 3 after all these years. He'd kept it, refusing to sell despite offers that would have funded a year's worth of operations. This car was here that first day. It witnessed us, watched us become something neither of us expected. Kyle ran his hand along the perfectly restored body, remembering how his hands had shaken that first time he'd worked on it under Darius's supervision. I was so scared of everything back then. Scared of wanting you, scared of being inadequate, scared of admitting what I needed. And now? Darius asked, pulling him close against the car's flank. Now I'm scared of nothing, Kyle said firmly. You taught me that fear is just excitement waiting for permission. That vulnerability is the gateway to everything worth having. That asking for what you want isn't weakness, but the bravest thing you can do. Darius's eyes grew suspiciously bright. You taught me things too, you know. That age and experience don't matter as much as openness and honesty. That sometimes the best gift you can give someone is patience while they discover themselves. That love doesn't diminish when you share it with someone inexperienced, it multiplies. They stood there as the sun set over the shop, painting the walls with orange and gold, the same light that had illuminated their first encounter. In the distance, they could hear the city coming alive with evening sounds, traffic, voices, life continuing its eternal rhythm. Do you ever regret not being with someone more experienced? Kyle asked quietly, a question he'd carried for years but never voiced. Someone who already knew what they were doing? Darius turned him around, framing his face with both hands, those hands that had taught Kyle everything worth knowing about pleasure and connection. Never. Not once. You gave me something no experienced partner could, the privilege of being your first everything. The joy of watching you discover yourself. The honor of your trust when you were most vulnerable. Kyle, you gave me purpose again. Before you, I was going through motions. After you, I was living. The words broke something open in Kyle's chest. All the insecurities he'd never quite vanquished flooding out in tears he didn't bother to hide. Darius held him through it, solid and present, just as he'd always been. Thank you, Kyle whispered when he could speak again. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For wanting me when I was inexperienced. For teaching me when I knew nothing. For loving me through all my fumbling and uncertainty and growth. Thank you for letting